Europe didn't start the Bible. In fact, it's barely on the map, until one surprising moment changed everything. Welcome back to the Word, where Bible truth meets real life. This is the Biblical Bloodlines Series, and today we're unlocking the origins of Europeans as laid out in the Bible. Some of what you'll hear today completely flips the script on what most of us have been taught. And listen, you're going to want to stay until fact number 6, because when we get there, we'll reveal something that ties ancient prophecy, Roman power, and the future of Christianity into one single mind-blowing truth. A truth that could change how you see European history and the Church's destiny forever. So buckle up, let's get into it. When people think of Christianity, Europe usually comes to mind first. Rome, the Vatican, Gothic cathedrals. They told you the Bible is a European story, right? But the truth? Europeans came much later, and not how you think. But here's the twist. Europe doesn't even show up in the Bible until later. Long after Eden, the flood, the patriarchs, and the Exodus. Today, we're peeling back layers of history and tracing 7 powerful, lesser-known facts about how Europeans actually entered the biblical story. This is a spiritual game changer, especially if you've always assumed Europe was the center. Stick around, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button to help us spread the word to the world. Fact number 1. The forgotten father of Europe, Noah's son, Japheth. When we talk about the roots of nations, most people zero in on Shem and Ham. Shem, the father of the Semitic peoples, and Ham connected to Africa. But tucked quietly in Genesis chapter 10:2 is the story of Japheth, the man who would shape the face of Europe. The Bible lists Japheth's sons, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. These names aren't just ancient footnotes. They map directly onto the rise of the Indo-European world. Gomer, often linked to the Celts. Magog, tied to the Scythians, fierce warriors of the steppe. Javan, directly connected to the Greeks. Tubal and Meshech point to the early peoples of Russia and the Caucasus. This isn't speculation. Linguistics, archaeology, and ancient historians like Josephus confirm it. Even more chilling, Japheth's blessing in Genesis chapter 9:27. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem. Prophecy right there. Europe would grow, expand, and one day step into the spiritual heritage of Israel. But how exactly did Europe's story unfold? Let's follow the trail. Fact number 2. Javan, the biblical spark behind Greece and Rome. Javan, Japheth's son, is the launchpad of Western civilization. From this family tree grew the languages we speak, the philosophies we teach, and the cultural DNA that still drives the Western world. His descendants, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, Dodanim, map directly onto the Mediterranean powerhouses. Elisha, likely ancient Elis in Greece. Tarshish, possibly ancient Spain or southern Italy, a commercial giant in the ancient world. Kittim, Cyprus. Dodanim, Rhodes and the Dodecanese Islands. Javan's lineage shaped the very nations that would later become the cultural and military engines of Greece and Rome. The same Greece that laid the intellectual framework of the New Testament world. The same Rome that built the roads Paul would walk. And here's the kicker. The New Testament itself was written in Greek. Javan's influence wasn't just political, it became the language of salvation. But the story doesn't stay in the past, it jumps into prophecy. Fact number 3. Magog, Europe's shadow in the end times. Magog doesn't fade quietly into history. He resurfaces as a prophetic juggernaut in Ezekiel 38 and Revelation 20. Ezekiel calls him the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, pointing north of Israel. Many scholars link Magog to the Scythians, nomadic warriors who roamed Europe and Central Asia. Others trace the bloodline into the Slavic, Germanic, and even Nordic tribes. But here's what's gripping. Magog re-emerges at the climax of history. Revelation paints him as a symbol of final rebellion, nations gathering against God's people. Europe's story isn't a straight line. It starts in Genesis, vanishes for a time, and comes roaring back in Revelation's final reckoning. But long before that battle, Europe received a personal invitation. Fact number 4. Europe's doorway, Paul's Macedonian call. Acts 16:9 changes everything. A man of Macedonia was standing and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." Up until this moment, the gospel had traveled through Asia and Africa. But this vision was Europe's open door. Paul didn't pause. He crossed into Europe without delay, stepping into cities like Philippi, Thessalonica, and Athens, places that weren't just dots on a map. These were the beating hearts of philosophy, politics, and art, centers that shaped the Western mind. And here's the twist. Europe wasn't reaching for God. God was reaching for Europe. Long before Europe built cathedrals, God was already building bridges. This wasn't Europe's pursuit of heaven, it was heaven's pursuit of Europe. Christianity's expansion into Europe started with a vision and rewrote the map of faith. And where did Paul's journey lead? Straight to the heart of Rome. Fact number 5. Rome, the empire that killed Christ, then carried his cross. Rome was a paradox. It executed Jesus but unknowingly paved the highway for his message to go global. The empire that crucified Christ also built the roads, ports, and postal systems that carried the gospel farther than ever before. Has this shifted your perspective? Let us know your thoughts below. We read everyone. Paul, a Roman citizen, leveraged that system. He wrote letters from Roman prisons. He planted churches in Roman cities. Christianity spread like wildfire along Roman trade routes. Rome, the Iron Empire, became the backbone of Christian expansion. The same Rome that once slaughtered believers would one day be home to church councils and cathedrals. Europe's story isn't simple. It's a story of brutal power and divine purpose. And its first European believer? Not a king, not a priest, someone most wouldn't expect. Fact number 6. Lydia, Europe's first Christian, was a businesswoman. Acts 16:14 tells us about Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira who was a worshipper of God. She was rich. She was respected. She was the first European to follow Jesus. If you're learning something new today, consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. Paul didn't meet her in a palace. He met her at a riverside prayer gathering. Lydia didn't just believe, she opened her home. Her house became the first church in Europe. Before cathedrals, before councils, before Constantine, Christianity took root in Europe through a praying woman and an open door. And that door stayed open, right to the end of the story. Fact number 7. Europe's final chapter, standing in the multitude. Revelation 7:9 gives us the final scene. A great multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language standing before the throne. Europe isn't the center. It isn't the forgotten. It stands shoulder to shoulder with Asia, Africa, and the Americas, equal, diverse, united. The Bible's message? No single nation holds the crown. No one is written off. The story that began with Japheth's migration ends with a global family worshipping together. Europe's story in Scripture is layered, ancestral, prophetic, redemptive. It begins with a quiet genealogy in Genesis and crescendos into the global kingdom in Revelation. God weaves the destinies of nations in ways we rarely see until we step back. And Europe? It's been part of the plan all along. The problem is this. Centuries of Eurocentric theology flipped the script. It made Europe the hero and center of the Bible, erasing its true origins. When people believe the Bible came from Europe, they disconnect from their true heritage. And those who aren't European feel like outsiders. The truth is far more beautiful. Europe was adopted into the story by grace, not by dominance. When we recognize where Europe actually enters the biblical timeline, we can honor every group for their true contribution. We stop teaching a whitewashed gospel. We stop erasing Africa and Asia. And we start building a church that looks like the one God always envisioned. One body, many parts. Europe's biblical roots don't make it superior, but they do make it included. And that's a message worth reclaiming. Europe wasn't first, but it was never forgotten. From Japheth to Javan, from Lydia to Paul, from Rome to Revelation, Europe has always had a place. Not at the head of the table, but at the table nonetheless. And in God's house, everyone eats. So here's the bottom line. Europe's biblical roots run deep, starting with Japheth, the father of many nations. Javan's lineage gave us Greece and Rome, two powerhouses of history and faith. Magog shows up in prophecy, hinting that Europe's future is tied to God's plan. Paul's work in Macedonia brought the good news to Europe early on. Rome, yeah, it was tough, but God used it for his purposes. Lydia was the first European to say yes to Jesus, opening the door wide. And don't forget Revelation. It's clear Europe's part of God's final gathering. The big takeaway? Europe is important in the Bible story, but so is everyone else. And the more we see the whole picture, the more connected and strong our faith becomes. Stay tuned and watch video number 3 in our Biblical Bloodlines series, popping up now, where we're asking, was Noah the first Indian? You won't believe what we found. Stay blessed, the Word family.